Well, thank you, Raymond, for a very comprehensive, insightful and inspirational presentation. Whilst Raymond's taking his seat, can I invite the other members of the Economic Development Board to the podium, please? Terry Burgess, Professor Tanya Monroe, Dr. Mike Runge, Dr. Leanna Reid, Professor Goran Narus. We have a question over the...
Phil Harrison, City of Playford. I just want to preface the question around the NDIS. It is a reform that people think is around care, health and lifestyle, and I think more importantly it is an economic reform. So what actions and analysis has the EDB undertaken in regards to the NDIS implementation and outcomes?
Thanks for the question. The NDIS isn't specifically a priority of the EDB at the moment, but let me make some comments about the NDIS in terms of the way we've been looking at it. The success of the NDIS depends on disabled people becoming powerful consumers, and in that role then forcing a change in the market. And one of the issues of being a powerful consumer, one of the enablers of being a powerful consumer, is that you do have control, you do have the money to spend and you do have control of that money. But there are a number of other important enablers to being a powerful consumer, and they are things like you do have a house that enables you to have the roles you want in life, you do have power, self-power, you do have purpose, you do have networks and the ability to set up networks. You do have the right service at the right time in the right place. If South Australia decides that it wants to be a leader in NDIS, then it needs to be an exemplar of NDIS. It needs the leadership to come together. It needs the leadership to decide to build all of the enablers to disable people being powerful consumers. That's not as hard as it sounds, because a number of those other enablers are in place in South Australia already. For example, as Raymond mentioned, the Centre for Wellbeing and Resilience that could do quite a lot of work with disabled people around self-power and purpose. It's not happening anywhere else. It is a distinct possibility that South Australia could decide to become the exemplar in NDIS, and if it did, the leadership could come together and do those things.
Any further questions from the room? Whilst we're gathering our thoughts, I thought that I might be able to pose something to the EDB, just pulling a few of the themes together that Raymond expressed. One was touched on briefly, the digitisation of the economy and the importance of the emerging role and the strength of small to medium enterprises. And I wondered whether there were any views about what are some of the potential positive and negative impacts of digitisation, and in particular, how can small and medium enterprises take advantage of it, or, and what are the pitfalls that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think it impacts everybody whether we realise it or not. The digitalisation of the economy is a shift of the way the world functions. De facto, it's a paradigm shift similar to the introduction of electricity or anything like that. It has a number of positive effects. It will, of course, enables not only the creation of new jobs. There are, I mean, how many would know there would be a job like chief blogging officer around, you know, those type of issues. So there are all kinds of new jobs that are created by this. There are also positive issues about removing, to a great extent, the importance of size in enterprises. You can be a one-man operation competing globally in some of the sectors that you do, because you are reaching the world digitally, you are leveraging what you do through digital systems. And the way I think I would recommend people to think about what is happening is that think about every task, and I'm not talking job here, I'm talking tasks, and a job is made up of multiple tasks, but think of every task being done by a team, and a team is made up of a person and a tool, okay? 50 years ago, there might be a hammer and a carpenter. Today, it's maybe a piece of software or machine learning software or sometimes called artificial intelligence, something like that, and a person. This tool is becoming smarter and smarter. It's becoming a better and better tool. And that enables the team to do more and more things. So that's the good news about it. The bad news is that as the tool gets smarter, the control of the team migrates from the individual to the tool. So the tool will tell the individual what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And that means that unless we on the human side keeps up with the skills and capability development, we become the junior partner in some of these teams. So the good news is more jobs will happen globally, absolutely, due to digitalization. They are not going to be evenly distributed. They're going to come, some of them will not come in the places where jobs are lost, because that's the other side of it. They will come in other places. But it will enable us, if we do it right, to, as an economy, win out of these things. But it will require access to infrastructure, and in this case, it is digital infrastructure. That means things like low latency mobile phone nets, so fifth generation digital networks, very important. We need to have skills development, so we need to have the skills that are relevant in this new world, which are not necessarily the skills that were relevant in the present world. We need to have the financial capability to invest and develop the tools that made up the other part of the teamwork in this area. And we must have a regulatory system that allows these type of innovations that are brought forth to become positive and are allowed to grow. That was a very long statement. The bottom line is going to be something good and something's bad. Depending what the net is, depends on where you live and who you are.
Leanna, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, another challenge I'd add to that is the skills development side of things, and the dearth we have of kids going into the ICT field. It just is already haunting us, but the numbers of job vacancies in this area, the lack of the recognition in our school systems that this is important, particularly for women. I think the numbers of women going into this field are just minuscule. That has to change, or else we really are going to be left behind. I guess that's part of the whole broader STEM education issue, ICT being a broad one. I don't think we portray enough to our kids in school what the career opportunities are in these sort of areas. We sort of think very straight and narrow. You know, you're a computer nerd, you're going to be in a lab or whatever, but when you think of what you could actually do with it. I remember a book in my own field, biotechnology, some years ago, which said, what are the degree options that can come out of, the career options out of a degree related to biotechnology? And it was one of those tree diagrams. One type of degree in the centre, and there would be hundreds of jobs around the periphery, going across to law as well as the technical and so forth. So that's one of our big challenges.
Actually, to build on that point, one of the statements about universities that I love is that we're training students for jobs that don't exist, but more particularly to avoid being replaced by robots and machines. If we think about the ICT jobs Leanna's talking about and STEM more broadly, I think we need to do everything we can to stop kids and parents thinking these choices are hard or they're difficult subjects, and actually seeing them for the creative industries that they are, where we're really empowering people to create their own jobs and to create the industries of the future. And I think some of the stereotypes around what someone in ICT does really need to be broken down.
Hi, I'm Jim Plouffe. I'm the publishing editor of the Lead South Australia, the news service for the state. And having that job, I spend my week scouring the state for stories that we can send overseas to show people that South Australia is doing wonderful things, so they'd invest, move here, know more about the state. But one of the things I'm always amazed at is that of the two things that we need, collaboration and innovation, we're quite good at innovation. We are absolutely, frankly, terrible at collaboration, embarrassingly terrible, in fact. And, I often find that Company A is spending all their time and energy trying to beat Company B down the street instead of trying to beat Company C overseas or interstate, or that Department A has no idea what Department B is doing. So I guess my question, especially for Terry, would be how can we change this culture? It's a huge question, but how is Tonsley, or how can we change this culture of being terrible at collaboration?
I think the first thing I say is that you should be pleased that collaboration does exist and is happening. I'm sure it's happening in lots of different places throughout the state, but certainly at Tonsley there is evidence of that, and what has been created there over the last few years has been an environment that does allow collaboration between different groups in a setting which is, I think, made conducive for that. And there's a lot of examples that I can give where people have met at meetings, companies that perhaps had some related contact with each other beforehand, and perhaps had some common threads, but normally wouldn't have got together and worked. And from those discussions, they've gone away and come up with ideas, and then suddenly you find people working together. My first exposure to innovation precincts was over in the US, and it was with a group of people that had set up an area within the innovation precinct, and one group was making robots, one group was working on music, and one group was working on textiles. And they were working together, and my question was, well, how can you work together with such different fundamental businesses? And the common thread here was producing materials that robots could be encased in to go in and work on fires and actually go where people couldn't go. The music aspect was the communication that the robots had with the outside world. And that group of people that were totally unrelated got together. Now, I'm not pretending that we've got something as exciting as that today at Tonsley, but what we do have are groups that are actually getting together and having that innovation. But you do need the right setting, and what's been created at Tonsley is certainly one of them. So there's some good news stories out there, and like always, I'll be very happy to take you around and demonstrate how good Tonsley is.
Dr. Reid?
Yeah, let me add something also from our innovative company survey basis that we're working on. It's a work in progress, but in that survey we specifically tried to target innovative companies, by that we meant new products to market, goods or services. We weren't doing an ABS span every company and say what the level of innovation is. And that was pretty interesting in its findings. And I think it supports your view that collaboration is something which needs to increase, company to company, company to research sector collaboration. I think it reflects in part the balance of the kinds of companies we have here. We are an SME state country, that's nothing surprising there. But in some of the sectors that we've surveyed, not outside this survey, 70% or so, Your Own Ruse has done a lot of this work, of companies have no intention to grow. They're happy, they're lifestyle companies, family companies generally, and I suppose good on them, they're making some good income for them. What we see as a challenge in this is to identify the ones who do want to grow and have the capacity to grow, and really use those as the basis on which to grow this state. And our survey suggested that those companies were particularly among the medium-sized companies, which, you know, 20 to 200 or so employees. They had a bit more capacity to grow, they'd already had some runs on the board, and they were more focused, interestingly, on collaboration than either the very large ones or the smaller ones. They outsource more, they regard universities as an important resource instead of something to fear. So I think there are a group in there that we need to focus on, and they're going to be very important for the future economy of the state.
Whenever I go anywhere outside this state, around Australia, I'm always struck by there's something about our scale that means we're small enough to know who to talk to, but big enough to make things happen. And despite the comments that have been made on collaboration, I personally think that I'd prefer us to put the focus on vibrancy and connectedness. You just have to look at the city, particularly at the moment with the Fringe and all the arts events happening now. It's very clear that this creates a sense of connectedness between organisations, people, sectors that wouldn't normally happen. And I think, you know, when you talk about industry and particularly innovative companies and SMEs, we need to focus on creating those ecosystems where they come together with the prospective entrepreneurs, the universities, where we make those boundaries a little bit more porous to enhance the chances of those connections.
I think also collaboration is one of the behaviours that businesses and services are attracted to when they're interested in transforming from one place to another, and less so when they're interested in doing more of the same. And one of the particular collaborations we've become interested in the ageing well space has been the collaboration with older people. And Raymond talked about the Living Laboratory. This is effectively a network of perhaps 5,000 or 10,000 older people who would sign up into a network where they can test, where they can invent, where they can have access to, where they can learn about products and services that might truly change their lives and the lives of the businesses working. And that's truly then a collaboration between them as now a very significant capacity of older people behaving very differently and targeting very differently with businesses and services.
Got to take us on a slightly different tack, I guess. We have a question down the front and I think time for one more after that. But Professor Munro mentioned and developed the theme of the arts. Raymond in his speech talked about the importance of the visitor economy. I wonder whether the panel has any thoughts or views about how those two things can work together and grow what is a very important part of our economy, being the visitor economy.
Thanks. Look, there's no question that we have a jewel in our crown in the state in the terms of the vibrancy, the excellence of our arts community across many of the established year-round companies that offer amazing products to visitors and people in the state alike, to some of the seasonal activities we're in the middle of now. But what we've realised as a board is that there's an opportunity for us to do quite a significant piece of work working with those communities to create what we really see as a framework for decision making to support government in making decisions around investment, both in infrastructure and in operating costs in the arts, so that we can truly build on that excellence and critical mass to increase the economic impact and social and vibrancy impacts of the arts in the state. So this is a really exciting new area of work for us this year, and we're looking forward to working with all the organisations in the state to make the pie bigger and more vibrant.
Thank you.
Kontragakis, KPMG. Just following on from that theme, how do we create a visitor and stay economy? So one of the things I've been observing is the rate of growth in Melbourne and Sydney that's going to occur over the next 20 years. 100,000 new people in each one of those cities, from 5 million to 8 million people. And what I'm observing is the amount of investment that's going into schools, in infrastructure and retail and property, and a driving force behind their economies. And I just want to understand whether population growth in the context of South Australia is on the EDB agenda. Because at the moment, we're sitting at a growth rate of 0.7%, about 12,000 people per annum. And not long ago, we were 25,000 people per annum, and that created enormous stimulation in our economy. And how do we get that vibrancy that we enjoy in the next 2 months to occur through the course of 12 months?
Yeah, I'll take that at the highest level, and then my colleagues will fill in the details. Obviously it is, because you only have to look at some of the areas that are the greatest potential for new jobs, and we can't fulfill it off of our current population base. So we have to look at continuing to attract, and that's why looking at the 10 priorities, as I said, is really important. So the priority number 8 around the vibrant city is a critical economic development priority. The priorities around education and is a critical economic development priority. So obviously, as we look at growing, the numbers of people that we need to attract into the state to fulfill the job opportunities that we believe businesses who want to grow will create is critical. And you, I'll have your Honor in a minute talk to you a bit about the size of companies here. It's a bit surprising in a way. Also, of course, I alluded to the fact that people like myself who are 66 today are not stopping. I don't want to do what I did when I was 46, but I want to be engaged. Frankly, it would be immoral of people my age to say, okay, the rest of you take care of me. Because in principle, I can, well, my 3 grandparents lived into their 90s, so, I got a good shot at being one of these people who make it to 94, 95. And I won't make it there, all the studies suggest, unless I have a real purpose in my life. So there is this double aspect to creating employment. There's the employment that attracts people into the state, and I think that's very important, and then making sure the state has, almost like inward investment attraction agency, strategies that are attracting people into the state. And then there's the employment that attracts people like myself who are looking for new ways of being engaged than have existed in the past. And that combination, I think, can lead to not just the vibrancy that we experience in the city, but in fact vibrancy across our economic and social services.
Thank you. The question is very good. I mean, and part of it is you go somewhere because you want to temporarily be there. But if you're going to stay, there must be something that allows you to live the life you want to live there. We all know that. And that means we need to have opportunities like jobs, unless we are going to retire, and retirement is other opportunities, and they need to be provided. So I just happen to have in front of me here the Dun & Bradstreet data about the state's companies, and looking at the companies larger than $2 million in turnover, because we're looking to more than one-man companies, so looking at real companies. So we have about 9,000, give or take, of those companies in the state. And you expect to have a normal curve kind of down the size level. Doesn't quite look like that. What we have is up until about 50 million in turnover, we have a kind of a sliding scale, and then we have a cliff edge. Out of the 9,000 companies that we have, 300 are larger than 50 million. The rest is lower than 50 million. And that is an unfortunate distribution of company sizes. Yes, we are an SME economy, but we expected to have an SME economy which has a kind of more even distribution up to size, and we don't. We have a distribution, then we have a cliff edge, and then we have very little above that. We need our companies that are on the size up to 50 million to want to grow. And we want them to grow, and we want them to export. We don't want them to settle down at that size and be happy. Happiness is good, but it isn't quite what we want. So in order to provide these opportunities, we need to have these things. In addition, we need to provide the opportunity for those who come in for other project-type reasons, the environment in which can allow them to decide to stay. So, take the example around the submarines that was mentioned by Raymond in his speech. We're going to have a number of French people turning up to be part of that project. And they will bring skills, which is, of course, why they come. They have skills that we may not have here. We probably would like those people to stay, in some way or another, and even to make them Australians. And in order to do so, we first must entice them to come, which is a combination of having the right people to come and knowing the French. That means that we must have a school opportunity for them to provide French-approved schooling, because education is one of the critical parts of French society. So that's the first one. It's not teaching in French, it's teaching according to French curricula, which is really important. The second issue we must do is to have the opportunity for these people then to be able to use their skills in other things in order to stay. So we must be able to have those industries that can draw on those skills, so they might be able to stay and leverage the skills that we have around these areas. And that's just an example of what we must do to fulfill the answers to your question, Con, around how do we get the right people to come and how do we get them to stay in this area. Because if you look and I am going to be very controversial now, let's reflect on the other side of a visitor economy, and I'm not going to give you a rhetorical question. Who would you rather be? The person who makes a lot of money and can choose to go to a place and have a nice holiday where they serve you Bacardis and other useful things by the beach, or the person who lives and works in the environment that serves you those Bacardis and can never afford to go anywhere else in the world?
Can I add one thing as well, just about the attractiveness of certain things that we're doing in here? And I'm going to use Tonsley as an example because Tanya just mentioned the fact that a lot of people don't really know what careers they're going to follow, what they're going to do, what technologies they may pursue. And I just jotted down 5 companies and what these companies are doing at Tonsley, which makes South Australia attractive and I think would ensure that people stay. At Tonsley, the energy issue is a big problem, as you can imagine, in this state, and I believe probably in Southeast Australia. But you've got companies there involved in developing grid-scale batteries, solar thermal systems, and the hydrogen energy economy. If you look at on the metal manufacturing side, you've got companies that are developing 3D titanium printing. And if you want to look at the health sector, we've got companies there producing a portable X-ray machine that actually goes to the patient rather than the patient goes to the machine. So there's lots of innovation and new ideas, and I think that sort of thing is going to attract people, and once they come to the state, they will see this, that there are these opportunities here. We are moving away from the traditional sectors that we were on in this state, and we've got a lot of new ideas that I think will help to retain people.
And I'd like to add that I think Terry's really captured one of the things that I think we need to shift, which is the narrative, and make it easier for people to tell the really positive stories of fantastic things happening in the state. Terry talks of the great things happening at Tonsley. You look, for example, up at Mawson Lakes, and we've got the Tech Park and UniSA's campus there, the new State Manufacturing Technology Centre, our new Future Industries Institute, which is creating mobility programs for people to come and go between companies and the university, and free access to our infrastructure. I think there's so many good stories of what's happening to lower the barrier to collaboration in the state, but we're not yet good enough at telling them.
If I could just add to that as well, really underlining Raymond's point, that nearly 20% of the population of South Australia, or for that matter, most states in Australia and other places, are operating at really, that is older people, operating at really quite a low level of productivity. And these people are increasingly saying to us that they're not happy about this. They do want to retire, but they do want to then flex on into other forms of productivity, most of which are, in a sense, not yet invented. So we are talking here about really a revolution in productivity, maybe the boomers' last revolution, to kind of sort that out for us. And if that happens, that does attract into the state all kinds of people who want to work around that, because that's not a business that currently exists.
Yeah, and I want to pick up too on Michael's point about infrastructure. I think we agree, and we didn't touch on this today too much because we've done it in this very forum quite aggressively a year or two ago. But we do have to allow the political process the courage to invest in the infrastructure we need for the future. And we've got to get a lot more creative about how we pay for it, and how we understand how to finance it. And I think there's very good illustrations of that in Adelaide. I mean, everybody talks about the social infrastructure that the Oval was and so on, and what that's done on many different fronts, both for our own perception as a state, but also for attracting tourists and so on. Things like the SAMRI, which very directly has attracted, over 10% of the workforce in the SAMRI building have come from overseas. And they wouldn't have come without the infrastructure and the organization that is provided to enable them to do world-class work here in South Australia. And I guess, I have to confess my own, I didn't move back to Adelaide after being away for 37 years, and by the way, the accent's from Clarendon, in case you were wondering, where I grew up. I didn't move here simply because it was a great place to live. It is a great place to live. But I also moved here because it's a great place to invest. And the businesses, certainly that I'm involved with, I'm very excited about their potential. This is a great place to live and do business. But we have to, more of us, tell the story about our state, not in some, make-believe fairy tale fashion, because it won't be easy. And part of the story is we're going to have to work hard to get there. But guess what? Everybody's going to have to work hard to get there. And we're not exempt from that. But the opportunities to work hard in South Australia and be successful and have a great life are absolutely phenomenal and almost unique. That's the privilege we have as South Australians, and we must not squander that privilege, either on the enjoyment of being living in South Australia, nor on the working hard to create the economic and social infrastructure that will support this for the next 100 years.
Thank you, Raymond. We have one last question from the middle of the room.
Thank you. Sam Lawrence here from the Department of Education, and I'm a GLF 2017 participant too. My question focusing on education of the next generation, particularly in technology. Raymond, you mentioned that technology is the way of the future, and therefore education needs to be leading this, particularly, I reckon, for public education children, to give everybody the greatest chance. Yeah, I can also comfortably say, as a leader of education, the least understood and most feared area of the curriculum is digital technologies. So I'm concerned about this, and I know a lot of leaders are in the Department of Education too. So what would your message be to the DECD about supporting the next generation of leaders? And I'd also like to point out, not necessarily is STEM going to be the answer to this, because I know a lot of the funding in STEM is going into infrastructure, not education of leaders and students.
Leanna, do you want to take the first part?
Well, I think from what I said before, I obviously agree very much that the education of our young people is crucial, future leaders. We have a lot of challenges there to address, and skills in digitisation is just one of them. I mean, the lack of confidence that we have in many teachers in primary school level to teach maths is extraordinary. You sort of tend to think primary school's maths not that hard, but it takes confidence and enthusiasm. You've got to be the combination of knowing your subject and being a really inspiring teacher. I'm sure we all have a history. I do. My first year science teacher is why I'm what I am today. She was just so inspiring. Yep, that was what I was going to do. That's the crucial part of it. So I think we have a long way to go to transform the teaching of these areas which are relevant to the modern technologies and absolutely crucial. I guess the trend away from doing the hard subjects in late high school is another end of the spectrum there. Get a high ATAR, don't worry about how you get it. I've heard comments, for example, from some private schools that they want the students to take the easier subjects, not because it'll help the student, but they said it's our reputation as a school that's at stake here. So there's a lot of issues there that we need to address. Maybe I'm a bit simplistic because I'm not in the education department, but I did say to the head of the education department, you know, you guys have the ultimate tool, carrot if you want to call it, or a stick. You employ teachers. All you really have to do is to say, these are the standards of what we're going to expect from our teachers going forward. We won't employ them otherwise, and I think that'll change a lot of the behaviour that needs to happen. But it's the key underlying part of the future, really, to get that skill base up.
Look, that was the killer question in my view, and the long-term game, because I think the focus must be on teacher quality and changing perceptions of the profession as being something that bright, driven, enthusiastic young people aspire to do. And I think that'll change the game, but it'll take time and courage.
Could I add something as well? I'm from the resources sector, and one of the challenges you always get in the resources sector is to attract people into the mining and the oil and gas areas. And I think generally mining companies would take it that it's the responsibility of all employees to go out there and tell the story, to explain what mining is, to explain what oil and gas is, and go into the schools to demystify and to get rid of some of the misperceptions about the sector. One of the things that I think then is positive is that people actually start to think about what they're doing. And my example is in the resources sector, but you can think about it in other things. There are lots of opportunities for everybody, and I've often said when I've talked about trying to get more people to do science and maths, and higher science and maths at school, it's a responsibility of everybody to go out there and to try and get your daughter to go back and say that I think there's magic with maths, and take them to the Science Alive conferences and workshops and the Maker fairs, because it's not going to happen by chance. And I think one of the challenges I always have is that people seem to blame the teachers for all that. Now, I know a lot of maths and science teachers that my children had, and I did not get on with them particularly well. However, it's the responsibility of all of us to sort of say, well, what sorts of things should our children be doing, and assist them to do that, in my opinion.
If I may add a few things there, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack on that. The first one is that we need, as a whole, to have a better understanding of science on the level of the managerial level in companies, generally speaking. So I take a lifelong learning view on this one. So if you look at the company, what you need on the management or board side is people who can understand the areas of largest risk and opportunity for the firm. And the area we're now facing is very much the area of science-introduced opportunities and threats. And that means we need to understand digital technologies, we need to understand this area so we can make the right decisions. And not making a decision is also a decision, is normally a disastrous one in this area. So we do need to generally to up the skill on the people that sit in that level of companies, because most companies, as Raymond said earlier, will be challenged by a technology-grounded business model, whether they know it or not. And the more they are insightful around these areas, the better it is. So that's my first issue. So from that area, the science and technology capabilities on the board and management level in company really on the whole must be upped. We are very far behind some other key countries in the world on this one. The second area, as technology emerges, in parallel with that emerges a whole host of ethical and other challenges that frequently has to be discussed in depth and really reflected on. And that means that HAS and these type of areas, so humanities, arts, social sciences, becomes really critical to understand that. To understand everything from what are the emotional implications of a shift in the way your task is performed, and what I said before, this balance that you are no longer in charge in the team, you are told by your computer what to do, when to do it, how to do it, they check the time it took you in these areas. What are the implications for you as a human being? What right do we have to impose certain things on these areas? Just because we can access everybody's information, should we? There are a whole host of discussions that needs to be had, and a lot of that needs to be informed by subjects that we may not necessarily think about, like, for example, philosophy, which are critically important around some of these areas. So what that means is the impossible task of also broadening the base of knowledge that we give our students so they are open for further deepening their knowledge in these areas, to partake in those decisions and to understand the deeper consequences of societies that some of the science-based decisions may lead to. So we have quite a complex issue ahead of us in terms of giving our children the opportunity to embark upon a journey where they no longer study to be work ready. They study to create a job that doesn't exist, that they will have, be that as an entrepreneur or in a large company, and that they are also able to have a success in life because they are able to understand the deeper consequences of the decisions that they take when they embark upon those journeys. And that's quite a challenging environment to create in them the understanding of the continuous learning they have to go through to be able to operate successfully as individuals and components in societies in that world.
I wonder if I could just add one thing to that. We're just back from the Aging 2.0 conference in San Francisco, in which we saw a very wide range of newly developed products by entrepreneurs and startups that almost always had a technology base to them and a social service base to them. And the development of both sets of skills that might start to create very different kind of career expectations, picking up Tanya's point, for some people who might be interested in these topics but don't specifically want to work just in the area of digital all their lives.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for some great questions.